When we think of history, we usually picture statues.
Yeah, exactly. Like carved from marble.
Right, completely still and just totally sanitized. We look up at a historical figure and think, well, that's the hero, or that's the villain. It's clean.
It is. It makes the past a lot easier to digest.
But then you actually read the unvarnished history, and suddenly that statue just cracks wide open, the marble shatters, and you're looking at a messy, paradoxical, deeply uncomfortable human reality.
Which is a completely different experience from what we get in grade school.
Exactly. And that is exactly why we are stripped.
Shadows and Saints. Today, we're diving into the unvarnished, gritty truth of the British Raj and Gandhi's complex legacy.
You know, history is rarely black and white. Are our historical heroes and empires really as simple as textbooks claim?
Look at the evolution of Kalapani. After the 1857 uprisings, the British built this massive prison to crush resistance. The architecture of isolation. This star-shaped nightmare with nearly 700 cells was literally designed for total psychological destruction. Inmates were chained to the kolhu, harnessed like animals to extract 30 pounds of oil daily. Absolutely brutal. This bred fierce resistance. In 1872, an imprisoned soldier named Sher Ali Khan actually assassinated Viceroy Lord Mayo right there. Moving on to Winston Churchill's legacy, we see this brutal imperialism peak during the devastating 1943 Bengal famine. Up to 3 million people died. Churchill actively refused to send aid, a policy that remains deeply, deeply controversial today. Comparing forces here, Gandhi famously championed nonviolence, yet controversially remarked India might use an atom bomb against the British. While publicly preaching that nonviolent resistance was vastly superior, that shocking atomic remark shows the era's absolute breaking point pressure. Ultimately, though, he warned that nuclear weapons would mean certain suicide for mankind, completely destroying our moral boundaries. But there's a private paradox here. Behind this globally revered peacemaker was a man hiding some profoundly disturbing personal controversies. For instance, during his early years in South Africa, Gandhi held explicitly racist colonial views toward Black Africans. While those racial views evolved, his deep-seated guilt over sexuality sparked an extreme, lifelong obsession with absolute purity. His ashrams became strict laboratories. He enforced extreme celibacy, separated married couples, and exerted uncompromising control over his followers' lives. During the horrific 1946 Noakhali riots, amidst all that violence, Gandhi enacted his most extreme, shocking spiritual test yet. The experiment? He actually forced his 18 and 19-year-old grandnieces to sleep completely naked with him. He viewed this as a sacred sacrifice, bizarrely believing his personal purity could literally stop the deadly riots sweeping India. This caused a massive split. His own son and closest allies were absolutely horrified, seeing it as a terrifying abuse. So, what do you think? How do we reconcile monumental achievements with deeply disturbing flaws? Do they forever stain legacies?
stripping away those sanitized textbook versions today in this deep dive.
Oh, yeah, we are getting into the real stuff today.
We really are. We're looking at the British Raj in India. We're going to unpack the grim reality of the economic drain, the absolute horrors of the Kalapani prison, and the Bengal famine.
Really heavy topics.
Yeah. And alongside that, we're taking a deeply unvarnished look at Mahatma Gandhi. We're examining his life, his philosophies, and some genuinely disturbing private experiments.
Right, the stuff that definitely doesn't make it into the mainstream narrative.
Exactly. And just to lay our cards on the table for you listening right now, we are diving into some incredibly raw, sensitive, and politically charged realities today.
Yeah, we're talking extreme violence, racial slurs, and some really unsettling sexual dynamics.
So we just want to be clear. We aren't here to judge or pick sides or endorse any specific worldview. We are just mutually agreeing to look at the historical data exactly as it was recorded in the sources, no matter how uncomfortable it might be.
And honestly, that is the only way to genuinely understand the mechanics of the past, you know?
Absolutely.
Like, if we want to understand the individuals who fought the British Empire, we first have to establish what that empire actually was, mechanically speaking.
Right, because there's this lingering narrative that despite its flaws, the British brought this civilizing mission to India.
Yeah, and the defense that usually gets brought up there is the railway system.
I hear that all the time. The idea that the British supposedly unified the subcontinent by laying down thousands of miles of train tracks.
Exactly. But when you actually look at the historical economic data, that defense just completely falls apart.
It really does.
Yeah, the historical analyst Shashi Tharoor breaks this down beautifully. He points out that the railway system was not some philanthropic gift to the Indian people.
Right.
It was a tool, and it was engineered for two very specific logistical purposes. First, to extract raw materials like cotton, coal, and grain from the deep interior of India straight to the ports so they could be shipped to England.
And the second purpose?
To rapidly move British troops across the country to crush any localized rebellions.
Wow, and the detail that really stuck with me from the sources is how it was funded.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it was entirely paid for by Indian taxpayers, but all the guaranteed profits went straight into the pockets of British investors. So it wasn't a bridge uniting a nation at all. It was just a massive conveyor belt of theft.
That is a highly accurate analogy. And the overarching economic data totally supports that conveyor belt model.
How so?
Well, when the British arrived to establish their trade monopolies, India accounted for roughly 23% of the global economy.
23%. That's massive.
It is, but by the time the British left in 1947, after nearly 2 centuries of colonial rule, India's share of the global economy had plummeted to under 4%.
Under 4%. That is staggering.
It was the systematic, legalized looting of an entire subcontinent.
And I mean, if you are looting a population on that scale, you are inevitably going to face resistance.
Of course. People notice when their wealth is being drained.
Exactly. So how does an empire physically maintain control over hundreds of millions of people who are actively being exploited?
Well, you build an apparatus of terror.
Right.
And the ultimate physical manifestation of that apparatus was the cellular jail, known ominously as Kalapani.
Kalapani, which translates to Blackwater. I mean, just the geography alone is terrible.
Oh, totally.
It was built on the remote Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So you were surrounded by deep ocean on one side and thick jungles filled with venomous snakes on the other.
Yeah, escape was virtually impossible. But it's actually the architecture of the cellular jail that reveals the true intent of the British penal system.
Yeah, tell us about the layout.
So it was built between 1896 and 1906. It was this star-shaped fortress with 7 wings radiating from a central tower, and it held 698 solitary cells.
All solid.
All of them. And each cell was tiny, just 13.5 by 7.5 feet.
Wow.
But the truly sinister part of the engineering, the door of one cell faced the blank back wall of the adjacent wing.
Wait, meaning it was engineered for total psychological isolation?
Exactly. You couldn't see another human being. You couldn't speak to anyone.
So it wasn't just about locking up political prisoners. It was a machine explicitly designed to crush their minds.
Yes. And if the isolation failed to break a prisoner, the physical torture would. The records detail this regime of incredibly sadistic jailers, particularly an Irish officer named David Barry who oversaw the facility.
He treated human beings as literal beasts of burden, didn't he?
He did. The most notorious punishment was the kolhu, which was the oil press.
I need you to explain the mechanics of this, because when I read it in the sources, I honestly couldn't quite believe it.
Yeah, it's brutal. Typically, you would yoke a bull or an ox to a kolhu to walk in circles and crush mustard seeds or coconuts.
Right. An animal.
Right. But in Kalapani, the jailers yoked the political prisoners. A single human being was forced to extract 30 pounds of oil in a single day.
30 pounds of oil. By human power alone.
Yep. And if you passed out from exhaustion, you were tied up in chains and whipped.
My God.
And meanwhile, you're being fed on boiled wild grass with zero nutritional value. Or rice filled with mud and worms.
Just a pressure cooker of cruelty.
Exactly. Which inevitably led to a breaking point. In 1933, the political prisoners staged a massive hunger strike to demand basic human rights.
And how did the British respond?
The jail administration decided to violently force-feed the leaders to break the strike.
Including a prisoner named Mahavir Singh, right?
Yes. The guards pinned him down and forced a rubber tube down his throat to pump in milk.
God.
But the tube missed his stomach and went into his lungs.
Oh, no.
Yeah, he died in absolute agony. And then, terrified that news of his death would spark a full-scale rebellion, the British authorities secretly tied heavy stones to his body and dropped him into the dark ocean in the middle of the night.
I need to pause on that for a second for everyone listening. The complete disregard for human life there is staggering.
It really is.
But it also makes you rethink the nature of rebellion.
Yeah.
I mean, when you are trapped in an environment explicitly engineered to break your mind and your body, does an act of extreme, desperate violence become the only inevitable release of that pressure?
It definitely creates an almost unimaginable defiance, which actually brings us to a really fascinating historical flashpoint.
The assassination of Viceroy Lord Mayo in 1872.
Exactly. He was the highest-ranking British official in India, and he was murdered inside the most secure, terrifying prison the British had ever built.
By an inmate named Sher Ali Khan.
Yes. Sher Ali Khan was a former soldier sent to Kalapania over a family feud, and he harbored this deep, simmering rage against the British establishment.
Right.
So when Lord Mayo visited the Andaman Islands on an inspection tour, he was walking back to his boat in the fading evening light, and Sher Ali Khan simply waited in the shadows of the bushes.
Wow.
And in a flash, he leapt out and stabbed the viceroy to death.
Which really makes you wonder, was this kind of cruelty just localized? Like, was this just the result of a few sadistic jailers in a remote island outpost, or was this a feature of the entire colonial system?
Oh, it was absolutely systemic.
Yeah.
The total disregard for Indian life went all the way to the top of the British government.
Oh.
If we step back from the micro-level brutality of the prison, we can look at the macro-level brutality of their policy.
Specifically, Winston Churchill and the Bengal famine of 1943.
Right. And this is where the historical narrative gets deeply uncomfortable for a lot of people.
We are talking about an event that killed between 2 and 3 million people.
2 to 3 million people starving to death. And it's crucial to understand that this wasn't purely a natural disaster caused by a drought.
Yeah.
Churchill's wartime policies directly precipitated this mass death. The administration was actively exporting grain out of India to build up stockpiles for the war effort, while millions literally starved in Bengal.
And the archival records show that it wasn't just a lack of food, right? It was an active refusal to accept help.
Exactly.
Both America and Canada offered to ship food aid directly to Bengal, and Churchill just refused to allow the ships to be diverted.
He did. The texts we're examining highlight his extensive documented views on race, which shaped those decisions.
Right.
He is widely described in the archives as a staunch imperialist with overt white supremacist views regarding Indians. There is this deeply unsettling quote from Leo Amory, who was the British Secretary of State for India at the time.
What did he say?
Amory documented his own frustration with the Prime Minister, stating that on the subject of India, he didn't see much difference between Churchill's outlook and Hitler's.
That is heavy. It is incredibly jarring to realize that the same leader celebrated globally for standing up to tyranny in Europe. I mean, the guy giving the famous speeches about fighting on the beaches was simultaneously presiding over policies that starved millions of colonial subjects.
Yeah, it's a huge paradox.
It really forces you to ask who exactly gets to write the history of a hero,
It's a vital question. But this contrast actually perfectly sets up the paradox of the Indian resistance.
How so?
Well, if the British Empire relied on brute physical force, systemic starvation, and eventually weapons of mass destruction, the primary resistance movement in India relied on the exact opposite mechanism.
Enter Mahatma Gandhi.
Exactly.
His entire public philosophy rested on two pillars, right? Satyagraha, which translates roughly to truth force, and Ahimsa, which is radical nonviolence.
Right.
But I want to understand how that actually works against an empire willing to starve millions. Like, how is nonviolence a practical mechanism?
Well, Gandhi didn't view nonviolence as just a passive political tactic.
Okay.
He viewed it as a universal, active spiritual law. He believed that accepting suffering without retaliation would eventually awaken the conscience of the oppressor.
That's a massive gamble.
It is, and nothing tested that philosophy more than the advent of the atomic bomb in August 1945.
Yeah, when the U.S. dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, most of the world saw this and thought either, well, the war is finally over, or they were just totally paralyzed by the sheer apocalyptic horror of the weapon.
Exactly. Many political scientists at the time argued the bomb was so terrible it would actually force humanity to embrace peace out of pure self-preservation.
But Gandhi rejected that logic entirely, didn't he?
He did. When journalists asked him if the atom bomb made nonviolence obsolete, his reply was emphatic. He said no. He argued the bomb, quote, deadened the finest feeling that has sustained mankind for ages.
I have to admit, I'm a bit confused by his stance here.
How so?
I mean, you see a bomb vaporize an entire city in seconds. Wouldn't the logical conclusion be that physical force ultimately won? How could he possibly maintain that nonviolence was stronger than a nuclear weapon?
It comes down to his underlying mechanics of power. Gandhi had distinguished between two forces. The atom bomb represented material, physical force.
Right.
And physical force, no matter how massive or destructive, is finite. It has a limit. But truth and nonviolence represent moral and spiritual force, which he believed was infinite and unconquerable.
So it's like recognizing that the empire is trying to win a game of chess by smashing the entire board with a hammer.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
And Gandhi is essentially saying, well, you smashed the board to pieces, but you haven't disproved the rules of the game. A bomb can vaporize a city, but it cannot vaporize a moral truth.
Exactly the right framing. And he was so committed to this active moral force that he even wrote letters to Adolf Hitler during the war.
Addressed him as dear friend, right?
Yes. Addressing him as dear friend, trying to convince him that nonviolent action was a superior method to achieve national goals.
Which sounds completely naive in retrospect, but I guess it highlights his absolute unbending conviction.
He truly believed that spiritual force could overcome any material weapon. But, and here's where it gets complicated. If we pivot to the man himself, the historical records paint a picture of a leader whose moral high ground was intensely complicated and sometimes deeply compromised.
Okay, the marble statue of the Mahatma is about to shatter. Let's look at his early years in South Africa, from 1893 to 1914.
So Gandhi went to South Africa as a young lawyer to fight for the rights of Indians. But authenticated quotes from his own writings during this period reveal a distinctly hierarchical and racist outlook. He operated within a logic of strict distinction between Indians and Black Africans.
And the quotes from his letters are really, really hard to hear from a global icon of equality. He repeatedly used a deeply offensive racial slur, complaining that, quote, the Indian is being dragged down to the position of a raw kafir.
Yeah.
He argued that while Black Africans could legitimately be subjected to carrying passbooks, it was an insult to compel Indians to do the same. He literally wrote, we believe also that the white race in South Africa should be the predominating race.
Right. Now, just to provide the full historical context here, political analysts and historians like Martin Cloud argue that Gandhi's views evolved significantly. He eventually left this overt racism behind before returning to India. However, the reality of those early statements remains a painful, indelible part of his legacy.
And it wasn't just his views on race either. It was his approach to caste in India. The records delve into the famous debates between Gandhi and B.R. Ambedkar. Ambedkar was this brilliant leader fighting for the civil rights of the untouchables, the lowest rung of the Hindu caste system.
And Gandhi abhorred the practice of untouchability. He called it a sin against humanity and campaigned against it. Yet, paradoxically, he vigorously defended the Varna, which is the broader, rigid caste system itself.
Right, he argued it was a necessary functional division of labor inherited by birth that prevented unhealthy social competition. sufficient.
Exactly.
لیکن ان
He thought it
عظیم عوامی
ensured
اصولوں کے
societal
بالکل
harmony.
برعکس
But
ان
how
کی
do
لائف
you
میں ایک حیران کن
reconcile
نجی
the
تضاد بھی
champion
تھا
of
ایک
universal
ایسی
soul
عجیب اور
equality
سخت قسم
with
کی
a man
پابندیوں پر
who,
مبنی نجی
early in his
زندگی
career,
جو انہوں نے اپنے سب سے
explicitly
قریبی
endorsed
پیروکاروں پر
racial
زبردستی
hierarchies
مسلط کر
and
رکھی
later
تھی؟
defended the
اب آتے ہیں
rigid
دوسرے حصے
birth-based
پر
divisions of
جو
the
جنوبی
caste
افریقہ میں
system. It feels like a
1893
massive
سے
contradiction.
1914
It
کے
is a
درمیان
profound
نسل
contradiction.
پرستی پر
But
ان کے
to
ارتقاء
truly
کے بارے میں
understand the
ہے
mechanics of
ان
Gandhi's
20 سالوں میں
mindset, we
سب
have
سے
to look
دلچسپ
past his
بات
public
ایک
politics
انسان
and
کے
examine
سوچ
his
کی
most
مکمل
intimate private
تبدیلی ہے
life.
Okay.
خیر
Because his
1893 میں جب وہ
uncompromising
جنوبی
need for
افریقہ پہنچے
control
تو
didn't just
دستاویزات
manifest
یہ
in his
ظاہر
political
کرتی ہیں
campaigns,
کہ ان کے
it
خیالات
permeated his
نسل
inner
پرستانہ تھے
circle in
ان
deeply
کا ماننا تھا
disturbing
کہ
ways.
ہندوستانی
We're talking about his
افریقی
vow of
باشندوں سے
brahmacharya,
بہتر ہیں
right? His
یہاں
strict
تک
vow
کہ
of celibacy,
1904
which he
میں
took in
انہوں نے
1906.
افریقیوں کو
Yes.
And to understand the
جوہانسبرگ
root of
کی
this, we have to
پوری
go back to a
لوکیشن سے
trauma he
نکالنے کی
experienced when he
باقاعدہ
was just
درخواست بھی
16
دے دی
years
تھی
old.
Right.
لیکن
So his
وقت
father
کے
was on
ساتھ
his
ان کی
deathbed.
سوچ میں ایک بہت
Young
گہری
Gandhi was
تبدیلی
sitting
آئی
by his side, but he
1913
left
تک
his
آتے
dying
آتے
father to
انہوں نے
go be
مستقبل
with
کے
his young
افریقن
wife in
نیشنل
their
کانگریس کے
bedroom.
لیڈر
And
جان
during those
ڈوبی
brief
کے
moments
ساتھ
he was
اتحاد
away,
کر
his
لیا
father passed away.
اور پھر 1914 میں
And
جنوبی
historians
افریقہ
note that
چھوڑتے
this
وقت
event
ان کا
filled him
نظریہ
with a
بالکل بدل
crushing
چکا تھا
lifelong
بیٹی
guilt.
مولٹینو
Yeah,
کی
he
گواہی
seemingly
اس بات کا
associated
ثبوت
his
ہے
own
کہ وہ
natural
افریقیوں کو
sexual
تب تک
desires
بالکل
with a
اپنے برابر
profound
سمجھنے لگے تھے
failure.
He did.
یہاں
He
سے
began to view
ہم
those
اپنے
impulses
تیسرے
as an
حصے کی طرف
impurity,
بڑھتے
like a
ہیں
weakness that
ذات پات
distracted
کی
him from
بحث
his spiritual
اور اس کے
duty.
وہ
Which
پہلو
fueled an
جو
absolute
تھوڑے
obsession
غیر
with
واضح
purity.
یا گرے
Exactly.
ایریاز
When
ہیں
he took the vow of
اگر ہم
brahmacharya,
انٹرنیشنل
it wasn't
جرنل
just
آف
about
ریسرچ ان
abstaining from
ہیومینٹیز اینڈ
sex.
سوشل
He wanted
سائنسز
to
میں شائع
achieve
شدہ
total,
ایک
absolute
مستند
control
مقالے
over
کو
every
دیکھیں
single
تو
thought and
وہاں
impulse.
واضح ہوتا ہے کہ
And he
گاندھی
turned
اور
his
امبیڈکر کے
acrams,
درمیان
his
ہونے والی
communal living
بحث کو
settlements,
سمجھنے کے
into
لیے
strict
گاندھی جی کو ان
laboratories
کے
of purity.
مخصوص
Wait, so he didn't
تاریخی
just
اور
apply this
سماجی
strict
کانٹیکسٹ میں
celibacy to
پڑھنا
himself,
بہت
he
ضروری
enforced it on the
ہے
entire
دونوں ہی
community.
He
شخصیات
enforced
سماج
strict
کی بھلائی
celibacy
چاہتی
on
تھیں
everyone in the
مگر سچ
ashram,
یہ ہے کہ ان کے
including
راستے
married
اور اصول
couples.
That
ایک
is
دوسرے سے
wild.
He
بالکل الگ
demanded
تھے
absolute
اس معاملے میں
control.
ایک
The treatment
بہت
of his
بڑا
own son,
نظریاتی فرق
Manolo,
سامنے
is a
آتا ہے
chilling example
ایک
of
طرف
this.
گاندھی جی نے
When
ورنہ
Gandhi
سسٹم کی
discovered
حمایت
that
کی
Manolo was having
جسے
a
وہ صرف ایک
relationship with a
عملی
woman,
اور ایک دوسرے
he
پر انحصار
weaponized his
کرنے والے
own
نظام
body
سمجھتے
against
تھے
his son.
ان کے
He
نزدیک
undertook a
اس میں اونچ
fast,
نیچ یا ہائرارکی کی
explicitly
کوئی
using his
گنجائش
own
نہیں تھی
potential starvation
لیکن
as an
دوسری
emotional
جانب
tool
انہوں نے
to crush
چھوأچھات
his
یا
son's
انٹچیبلٹی
spirit.
کو
So he's essentially
انسانیت کا
forced
سب
his
سے
own
بڑا
son
گناہ
into a
اور
vow
جات
of
پات کے
celibacy
نظام
for
کی
life.
آلودگی قرار
And he
دیا
orchestrated
ان
a
کا سخت
brutal
ماننا تھا
public
کہ تمام
humiliation
لوگوں
for
کو
the woman
برابر
involved
یعنی
by
ہریجن
having her
بن
hair
جانا
cut off.
چاہیے
He
اور وہ
did.
مختلف
All in the
ذاتوں کے
name of
درمیان
testing
کھانا
his
کھانے
control
اور
over
شادی
his
کرنے کی
followers'
مکمل
purity.
حمایت
Right.
کرتے تھے
Which brings us to the
چلیے
climax of
اب
this
چوتھے
obsession
حصے کی
during the
بات کرتے ہیں
Noakhali riots in
پاکیزگی کا جنون اور
1946.
اس سے
Right.
جڑی
Gandhi
خامیاں
is
اور
77
تنازعات
years old.
خود
He is
گاندھی جی
revered
نے اپنے ایک
globally as a
احساس
living
کو
saint.
لسٹ فلڈ لو
But India
یعنی
is
ہوس پر
burning.
مبنی
The region
محبت
is
کا
being
نام دیا
torn
تھا
apart by
دراصل اس
horrific
جنون
communal
کی
violence
بنیاد
between
اس وقت
Hindus
پڑی
and Muslims.
جب وہ
And
محض
Gandhi
16
goes to
سال
the
کے تھے
region to try
ان
and
کے
stop the
والد بستر
bleeding.
مرگ پر تھے
But his
اور اسی وقت
internal
وہ اپنی
logic here
بیوی
is
کے پاس تھے
fascinating and
جب وہ
honestly
واپس آئے تو ان کے
strange.
والد کا
How so?
انتقال ہو
He
چکا تھا
believes that the violence
اس
erupting
دردناک
across the
واقعے نے انہیں
country
ایک
is somehow
شدت
a
احساس
direct
جرم میں
reflection of
مبتلا
his
کر
own
دیا
personal
اور یہیں
spiritual
سے انہوں نے اپنی
failures.
فطری
He
خواہشات
thinks
کو
his purity
ایک
simply
شدت
isn't
کمزوری
strong
اور
enough to
آلودگی
project peace.
سمجھنا شروع کر
So
دیا
he decides to conduct
اور
his
وقت
ultimate
کے
test
ساتھ یہ
at
احساس
77
اس
years
حد
old
تک بڑھ گیا
to
کہ
test
انہوں
his
نے
complete
48
mastery
سال کی
over
عمر
his
میں
carnal
برہمچاریہ
desires.
کا
Gandhi
باقاعدہ
began
عہد
sleeping
کر لیا
entirely naked in
حیران
the
کی بات
same
یہ ہے
bed
کہ انہوں نے
with
خود
his
کو
19-year-old
خدا کا خواجہ
grandniece,
سرا
Manu.
یعنی انو کا
And he
گاڈ
later
قرار دیا
expanded this to
اس
include
سے
another
بالکل
young
واضح
woman,
ہوتا ہے کہ ان کا
Appa.
مقصد
I
صرف
need you to
سیلیبسی
explain
یا
the logic
تجرد
there.
نہیں تھا
How
بلکہ
does
اپنے
a
ذہن اور جسم
77-year-old
سے
man
ہر
sleeping next to
قسم
a
کی جسمانی
teenager
خواہش کو جڑ سے اکھاڑ
physically
پھینکنا
or
تھا
spiritually
اس عمل میں ان
stop
کے
a
آشرم
violent
کا
riot in
نجی
the
ماحول
streets?
He
انتہائی
called this
سخت
a sacred
بلکہ
yajna,
ڈکٹیٹوریل
a
بن
holy
چکا تھا
sacrifice.
روزمرہ کی
In his
خوراک پر پابندی
worldview,
سے لے کر
spiritual force
شادی
was
شدہ
a
جوڑوں پر
tangible energy.
جبرن سیلیبسی
He
لاگو
truly
کرنے
seemed to
تک
believe that by
مکمل
putting
کنٹرول
himself in
گاندھی
the
जी के
ultimate
हाथ में
position
था।
of temptation
सोचिए,
and
अगर
proving
कोई
his
कवानीन
absolute
तोड़ता
purity by
तो
not
उसे शेडेड
reacting,
अवामी
he could
सजा और
generate the
जिल्लत का सामना
immense
करना
spiritual
पड़ता था।
power needed to
मिसाल
quell
के
the
तौर पर
violence sweeping the
उन्होंने अपने ही
nation.
बेटे
But his inner
मानीलाल को
circle didn't
उम्र
see
भर
it
के
as a holy
तजर्रुद पर मजबूर
sacrifice at
किया
all, did they?
No,
और
not
जैकी
at
नाम
all.
की एक
The
खातून के
records
बाल
note that this
कटवाकर
caused
उन्हें
massive
लोगों के सामने
outrage.
जलील
Key
किया।
editors of
और
his
हाँ,
newspaper
अपनी
resigned
बात
in
मनवाने के
protest.
लिए
Wow.
Even his own
फक्काकशी
son,
यानी
Dave
फास्टिंग को
Dusk,
एक
told him
जज्बाती
flat
हथियार
out that he
या
was on a
इमोशनल
dark
टूल
and
के
wrong
तौर पर
path.
I mean, he
बाकसरत
created
इस्तेमाल
a
किया
severe
जाता था।
fracture among his
अब हम
most
इस
loyal
जायजे के
supporters.
5वें हिस्से
They
की
just
तरफ
couldn't
आते हैं,
reconcile the
आखिरी
Mahatma with these
मुतनाज़ तजुर्बात
bizarre,
और उनकी
deeply
इंतहाई
uncomfortable
हद।
actions.
वक्त था
Exactly.
And we
1946
really
का।
have to look at the power
57
dynamics
साल
here.
की उम्र में
Is this
जब
really
गांधी
the
जी दुनिया
elevated
भर में एक
spiritual
जिंदा वली
test
का
of a
दर्जा रखते
master?
थे, तब मुल्क
Or
भर
is
में
it a
खास तौर पर
terrifying
बंगाल के
abuse of
नोआखिली
psychological
इलाकात में
control?
Right.
खौफनाक
I mean,
फसादात
when
शुरू
a
हो गए।
man who is
चारों
viewed by
तरफ खूनरेजी
millions
थी
as a
और
literal
इस सब के
saint
दौरान
tells a
गांधी जी का
19-year-old
मानना
girl that
था
she must
कि
sleep
बाहर
naked
जो
next to
नफरत
him to
फैल रही
save the
है
country,
वो किसी और की नहीं
that is a
बल्कि असल
staggering
में
abuse
उनकी
of power,
अपनी रूहानी
regardless of what
कमजोरियों
his
का नतीजा है।
internal spiritual
इस शदीद
justifications were.
खूनरेजी के
It
दौरान
definitely forces us
इन्होंने
to
अपनी
confront the
पाकी का
darkest
एक
shadows of
आखिरी
his legacy.
और सबसे
It
मुतनाज़ा
strips away the
इम्तिहान लेने
myth
का
of the
फैसला
flawless
किया।
saint
उन्होंने
and
अपनी
leaves us
19
with a
साला
highly
पोती मनु
controlling human
और
being
एक और
who
खातून अब्बा
utilized
के साथ
immense
मुकम्मल बराना
psychological
हालत में
pressure on those
एक ही
closest to
बिस्तर
him.
पर सोकर
So what
अपनी
does this all
नफ्सियाती
mean for
कुव्वत का
you,
तजुर्बा
the
किया।
learner, listening
इन्होंने
today?
खुद इस
We
अमल को
started this
एक
deep dive by
मुकद्दस या
talking
जना
about
या
cracking
होली
open the
सेक्रीफाइस
marble
करार दिया।
statues of history.
इनका
And
ये
we covered
अजीब
an
दावा
immense
था कि
amount of
इस
ground,
रूहानी
from
आजमाइश के
understanding
जरिए
the
हासिल
true
शुदा ताकत से
extractive
ही
mechanics
मुल्क
of the
में फैली
British railway
नफरत का
system
मुकाबला
to
किया जा
the
सकता है
engineered
और
psychological
अपने सियासी
destruction
हरीफ
inside
जिन्ना
the
की
cellular
सोच को
jail.
भी
Right.
We've
रूहानी
seen how
तौर पर
Winston
शिकस्त दी जा
Churchill, who
सकती
was
है।
celebrated in the West,
जाहिरी बात है
enacted policies
इस
that
इक़दाम पर
starved
इनके
millions in
सबसे
Bengal.
करीबी
And
हल्के की
we've
तरफ
looked at
से
the
शदीद
intense
रद्द अमल
paradox of
सामने आया।
Gandhi, a man
अखबारात
whose
के अहम
philosophy of
मुदीरों ने फौरन
nonviolence was
इस्तीफे
so
दे दिए
robust
और
he
इनके अपने
believed it
बेटे
outmatched an
देवदास
atomic
गांधी ने
bomb.
Right.
साफ
Yet who
लफ्जों में
harbored
मुखालफत
early
करते हुए
racist
कहा
views,
कि आप
defended
बिल्कुल
the
गलत
caste
रास्ते पर
system,
हैं।
and
आखिर
subjected
में
his
हम
own
छठे हिस्से
family
की
and
तरफ बढ़ते
vulnerable
हैं।
young
एक
women to
मुतज़ाद मीरास और
terrifying
एक बहुत
emotional
ही पेचीदा
manipulation.
इंसान।
I think
इस
the
सारे
crucial
तज्जिए का
takeaway
निचोड़ ये
here is
निकलता
that
है कि
true
एक जानिब
historical
तो वो
knowledge
एक
requires
ग्लोबल
holding
आइकॉन थे,
multiple,
एक अजीम
fiercely
इनकलाबी
conflicting
जिन्होंने
truths in
न्यू
your mind at the
आबादियाती
exact
निज़ाम के
same
खिलाफ
time.
आलमी
A
आज़ादी की
person or
तहरीकों
an
को
empire
जन्म
can be
दिया और
responsible for
दूसरी जानिब वो
monumental
किसी भी
historical
दूसरे
shifts
आम इंसान की
while
तरह इंतहाई
simultaneously
पेचीदा
harboring
और खामियों से
undeniable
भरे थे
darkness.
जिन्होंने अपने
History is
साथ
never just
मुंसलिक
black and
कमज़ोर
white.
लोगों पर
It is shades of
इंतहाई
gray, and
रूहानी
often it's
और
just covered
जज्बाती
in mud.
काबू रखा।
So as we wrap
ये
up, I want to
हकीकत
leave you with
बिल्कुल
one
वाज़े
final
तौर पर
thing to
दिखाती
mull
है
over.
कि किसी
Something
भी
that
इंसान
connects
की
the two
मीरास
halves
हमेशा
of Gandhi's
बाइनरी
life
या
that we've
सीधी सादी
discussed
नहीं
today.
होती बल्कि बहुत
Consider
मुतज़ाद हो
this.
सकती है।
If Gandhi's
तो इन सब बातों
unparalleled
के
ability
बाद
to
एक
mobilize
बहुत ही
millions
अहम
of people
सवाल
in a
जन्म लेता है।
nonviolent
हम
revolution
आखिर
was
एक
rooted in
ऐसी
the
तारीखी
exact same
शख्सियत की
obsessive,
मीरास को कैसे
uncompromising
परखें
willpower that
जिसकी
led him
हयात
to
अजीम
manipulate his own
अवामी
family and
कामयाबियों
followers.
और इंतहाई
Is it even
परेशान को
possible
निजी
to separate the
तजाज़ुबात का मजमुआ है?
world-changing political
ये
genius
सोच हमें इस
from
बात
the
को
deeply
तस्लीम करने
flawed
पर
human
मजबूर
being?
करती है
That
कि
is the
तारीख के
question.
Can the
अजीम
very
किरदार मुकम्मल
traits
नहीं
that make someone
बल्कि
a
खामियों से
Mahatma,
भरे
a great
पेचीदा
soul,
और मुतज़ाद
also make
इंसानी
them a
होते हैं?
monster to the
इन्हीं
people
हक़ाइक़ पर
closest
गौर
to
करते
them?
हुए इस तहकीक का सफ़र
Next time
यहाँ
you
ख़त्म
look up
होता
at a
है
pristine
मगर
marble
तारीख के इन
statue, ask
पेचीदा पन्नों
yourself,
को समझने की
what is
जुस्तजू
hiding inside this
हमेशा
stone?
जारी रहनी चाहिए।
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.